As I mentioned, I work for the District Attorney's Office in San Diego. We are a large office. We have over 300 prosecutors. And as a result, we can specialize in particular types of crimes. So that's why I've been able for the last 12 years to actually focus on one particular area called elder abuse prosecution. I have to tell you right now, and otherwise my boss wouldn't be very happy with me, I'm here on my own time. And what I express to you today are my views. They're not necessarily the views of my office. They're not necessarily the views of my boss. I hope to think that they would be, but not necessarily. So please, whatever I share with you today, hold me responsible, nobody else. Okay, this is not something that is being promoted by my office. This is something that I feel very strongly about. But I'm presenting it to you as a prosecutor, but personally as Paul Greenwood. I work in a courthouse downtown. It's called the Hall of Justice. And I find it very encouraging every morning when I walk through this building to be reminded as to what I'm doing. I'm actually seeking justice for the seniors of my community. And there is an inscription on the wall which is very powerful, which says that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I really believe that. And I think that's why it's important that all of us try to ensure that within our own circle of companions, of elders, that we try to make sure that no injustice comes to one of ours. And if it does, that we try to pursue justice for our elderly person. This was said, I think, by Hubert Humphrey. How do we measure the community in which we live and work? And he said originally, you look at the way that a community cares for various types of people, the very young, the elders, and the defenseless. And then you tell me if that community has compassion. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And people ask me about why do you have so much elder abuse or commitment in San Diego? And I think it says a lot about the community, because in our community we have tried to focus for many years on victims of domestic violence, victims of child abuse, and victims who are dependent adults with disabilities. So I think it does reflect upon the community at large. One thing I've learned as a prosecutor over several years is that a lot of crimes automatically come to the surface. Unfortunately, we have homicides, we have serious robberies, we have gang violence, we have a major drug problem wherever we live and work. And those cases don't take much to rise to the surface, to get reported to the police and get prosecuted by a prosecutor. What I have found over the last 12 years, though, is that there are many crimes out there that are being committed against senior citizens that typically don't get investigated. And it's those types of incidents that I really want to bring to the forefront. For example, the widow, age 79, who has just been ripped off to the tune of $900 by a landscape gardener. That typically is the kind of case that will not get any publicity. It won't get the attention of the local police officer. But that's the kind of case that I want to hear about and I want to pursue and seek justice for, because that's a crime that needs to be prosecuted. I borrowed this slide from Illinois. I like it a lot because I think it says a lot about what is happening out there with elder abuse in our communities. There is a lot of silence about elder abuse. Where is the silence most loud? It's primarily the silence is from our victims. Many are victims of either physical or financial elder abuse. Do not want to say anything about it. They don't want to report it. Why is that? Many times they're embarrassed. They're ashamed. Because the perpetrator may be a family member. Many times they are embarrassed that they have become the victim of a financial case. And they are afraid that if they come forward, somebody within their own family is going to say, aha, we need to place you in a nursing home and take away your independence. And as a result, the crime goes unreported. Many times the perpetrator will threaten the victim with retaliation, and so the victim stays silent. In other cases, the silence comes from the caregiver, or comes from even in the medical field, or comes from the neighbor, or comes from the clergy. People who think, it's none of my business, or I don't really want to get involved, because if I get involved, I'm going to be dragged into a criminal justice system, and I don't have the time. We have got to break this silence, and today is a step in that direction. So what I want to share with you are some of the top 10 tips that I have accrued over the last 12 years of prosecuting these crimes. And I think to myself, if only some of these tips had been put in place, I think we could have prevented so many more crimes than the ones I've prosecuted. Even if you don't think that you need the information for yourself, I think we can share it and pass it on to those who do need it. So tip number 1. Now I realize I'm speaking to many of you who are caregivers yourselves, and so this doesn't apply to you. But for those of you who are in the midst of tackling the issue of hiring a caregiver, or where do we go to find a caregiver? Let me tell you, at least in California, there are no mandatory background checks of potential caregivers. This is something which shocked me when I first entered this area. Of course, never ever hire a caregiver through a newspaper advertisement. I have seen so many cases where that has happened, and as a result, the wrong type of person has been hired to take care of the elder. What you need to do is, in every instance, I believe, go to a licensed, bonded agency to hire a caregiver. Don't just rely upon the references that the agency or the caregiver gives you. Insist upon seeing what kind of background check the agency has done on the applicant who is going to come into your home to take care of a loved one. And I've even gone to the point of suggesting and recommending that you might even want to hire your own private investigator to learn as much as you can about this person that you are entrusting into the lives of an elderly loved one. And why is this? It's because many cases that I've prosecuted over the last few years have involved convicted felons who ended up as a caregiver in my city. An example of a caregiver who was a felon is this lady. Her legal name was Caroline Gilbert, but she went by the name of Victoria Gilbert. Victoria was, as you can tell from this photograph, was a criminal. She was, as I would say, being detained at Her Majesty's pleasure in Nevada. She came out of Nevada Penitentiary as a convicted thief. She came to San Diego and could not get a job working at Nordstrom's or Walmart because they do a good background check. So she ended up with a caregiver agency. And their definition of a background check was a self-disclosure questionnaire. Question number 7 on page 1. Have you, Victoria, ever been convicted of a felony? Answer, no. So she was hired immediately. She was sent out to look after an 86-year-old widower in National City, and within 3 weeks had decimated his bank accounts, had obtained credit cards in his name that she was using, and was physically neglecting him. She was convicted after I prosecuted her. During the case, I brought in the owner of the caregiver agency, and I showed her this prison rap sheet. And her reaction was classic. She looks at it and goes, "Oh, she lied." What a surprise. A convicted felon lied. I couldn't resist it. I had to say, yeah, that was Victoria's secret. Is this going to get worse? Yes, it is, because all the indications are that the fastest growing job in America today in the healthcare industry is in-home support, in home health aides. And so it is absolutely vital that in choosing a caregiver, we choose somebody that does not have a felony criminal background. Tip number 2, of all the years I've prosecuted cases, the number one item that is being stolen from elderly females is jewelry. Who is stealing it? Well, it's maybe the convicted felon caregiver who comes into the home and sees how much jewelry is at their disposal, and the temptation is too great. They steal it, they take it to the pawn shop, and they cash it in. But there are other folks who are stealing the jewelry as well, and that's why it's so important to keep it in a locked drawer, keep an inventory of it. For example, one case I prosecuted, it was the carpet cleaner. He came into the home with his young companion. The young companion kept the elderly couple talking while the major player went back to the bedroom with his high-powered vacuum, stuck the vacuum into the jewelry drawer, and sucked the jewelry down the pipe into the truck. It's very important that if jewelry goes missing, we have photographic documentation of it. And that's why every elderly female in this country needs to have a good photographic inventory so that we know what we're looking for when it goes missing. Tip number 3 is every home, of course, needs a shredder. We must get into the habit of shredding every piece of information that we are going to discard which has information about ourselves. And the problem is that the risk of you or I becoming a victim of identity theft is huge. So we do need everyone to be disciplined enough to spend time, whether you live in a facility or in your own home, to collect up all the information that you are going to throw away and make sure it is shredded rather than thrown into the trash. Because unfortunately there are people, such as this fella, called dumpster divers, that's how they're known, who are systematically looking through trash, trying to find information about you and I. And so elders particularly are at great risk of having their information stolen and their identities taken from them. Tip number 4, for those people who live in their own homes, who are elderly, please can you make sure that their mailbox is secure. As a prosecutor, I've traced a lot of the crimes that have been committed against seniors to an initial act of mailbox theft. And so it is important that if there is a mailbox on your street which is unlocked, there is a significant risk that your mail is going to be stolen at some time or other. I'm trying to train the crooks in San Diego to leave a note in the mailbox saying, I've just stolen some of your mail, but they won't do it. And they don't steal all your mail, they will just eliminate from your mailbox those items that they are looking for, which is primarily that credit card statement that comes once a month. What can they use from that? Well, of course, they've got the credit card account number, but secondly, they've got those 6 blank pieces of paper that can cause so much damage. Those are the blank checks that the credit card company insists on sending you and I. And so it's important that if we have a mailbox, we've got to make sure that it's somehow locked so that nobody can gain access to it. If the elder is still mobile and has independence, I am encouraging every single senior citizen in our city to use a post office box. I think a P.O. box is useful even for one thing only, that when people ask me, where do I live? I tell them I live in a box. It's very useful. On our checkbooks, the fact that I can put on my checkbook that I live in a box is extremely helpful. And I know this is not for everybody because not everybody can get out to a post office. But the cost of renting a small mailbox for 6 months is only about $26. And it just provides that extra degree of privacy that we need to do. Also, if you have come to the end of your checkbook and you're requesting renewal of your checks from your bank or your credit union, if you are able to, please tell your bank or your credit union that you will collect your checks from the bank or the credit union. Again, I've had a lot of cases in which, strangely enough, the checkbook in the mail has disappeared. It's been stolen out of the mail. So my message is, if you are able to rent a P.O. box, today. Tip number 5, the younger generation are used to having a credit search done on them. Of course, until the recent economic downturn, credit was very easy to come by. It's not so easy as we all know, but even still, the younger generation apply for credit, and credit searches are done on them. The older generations, and I'm including now people over the age of 60, 70, 80, typically are not applying for credit and are therefore not having credit searches done on them. I believe it is imperative, particularly if we're a caregiver for a senior citizen, to make sure that a credit search is done on that senior at least 2 or 3 times a year. The number of times in the last 10, 12 years I've had the situation where an elderly person has discovered too late that their identity was compromised by somebody. And they've only found out about it 6 months later when a debt collection agency has come knocking on the door or has made a phone call saying you owe $12,000 in a credit card charge. They had no idea that they had a credit card in their name. And of course, had they done a credit search on themselves, then they would have found this out long before. So that's why it's very important that at least 2, 3 times a year such a search is done through either Experian, Equifax, or TransUnion. Now, I believe it's the same in Texas, and it may be the same all over the country. In California, everyone is entitled to 1 free credit report a year. But if you're not sure how to do a credit search on yourself, talk to your financial institution, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to assist you with that.
mmlearn.org